I'm going to give you a little bit of an update as to what we've been doing here on the Isle of Wight, particularly some research, because I mean, I told you earlier the tides have not been great for this week. I mean, it's been in the middle of the day and it's winter, so it's sort of dark until 8 o'clock in the morning and dark by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you haven't got a huge space of time to go out actually doing some digging. But we have a storm, which is great. Lots of waves, lots of fossils, and we've got some good tides coming up this week. So starting tomorrow, we're going to be down on the beach having a good look for some dinosaurs, and hopefully the Lord will bless us abundantly and we'll have some good results, right? We're also down here to do some filming and other stuff, so keep a watch out for that. But we did happen to go down to the beach on one of the first days that we were here. We had enough time with the tides to go and sneak down to a place called Shanklin. Now, Shanklin is where I'm staying at the moment. The beach is only about 100 yards in that direction, so that's really right down on the seafront, which is lovely. And Shanklin, you see, all around the Isle of Wight, you have famous things called chines. What is a chine? It's basically a gully where you have a river or a stream which is running down into the sea, and it erodes away a sort of little. It's not really big enough to be a valley. It's sort of a bit bigger than a gully. But in the Victorian times, people used to build great big gardens all running down the sides of this big gully. And they used to pay, people used to pay, or they used to charge people to actually walk down the chine onto the beach through all the beautiful Victorian gardens. One of the most famous ones on the island is Black Gang Chine, right? It has dinosaurs there, dinosaurs buried in the rocks, as well as the big plastic models from the 80s, right? Where people used to come and wander around and see all this kind of stuff. Well, Shanklin has a chine as well. It's a beautiful place, lovely gardens in there for you to walk down and see. But I'm not as interested in the gardens as I am when I get down on the beach and you turn right and you walk down underneath the great big cliffs, because you have great big green sand there, it's called. Lots of wonderful fossils come out of the green sand, including these fossils here. If I hold them up to the camera there, you should be able to see nice and clearly. It's a wonderful giant oyster shell. You can see it there. Absolutely beautiful. Runs all the way through the rock. These are fossils, by the way, completely entrapped and encased in the rock there. Great big beautiful seashells. Now you get lots and lots of these seashells coming out of here. This is just one that we happened upon as we were walking around. Plenty of these seashells, but recently they've started finding some dinosaurs coming out of Shanklin. Now this has been quite unusual for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But all right, this is stuff we've found previously. Like I say, the tides haven't been great, so we haven't been able to get out there to go and actually find a lot of stuff. But we were here earlier this year. You may remember I did a debate on Standing for Truth, so you can go back and check that out if you want. But we were down here on the Isle of Wight during that time, and here were some wonderful pictures that I took. On the left-hand side there, you can see a wonderful dinosaur vertebrae, a caudal vertebrae, that's a tail vertebrae of an iguanodon. Now, iguanodon is interesting because it was the first dinosaur to be discovered professionally, academically, if you like, by Gideon Mantell. Wasn't the first one to be named, though. That went to Megalosaurus, which was found by William Buckland and taken to Richard Owen, who was the founder of the Natural History Museum in London and invented the word dinosaur in 1841. But on the right-hand side, you can see one of those dinosaur footprints that John was talking about. Oh, yeah, you saw John's drowning dinosaur footprints, right? The little tippy toes. These are the proper big meaty footprints. Although what's interesting is that these footprints are not found in any layer that you find dinosaur bones. You always find the footprints below and the dinosaurs buried up above. Interesting little implication there, but we'll come on to that a bit later. But it's great to go and take people out. And, you know, one of the things that we're wanting to do next year, hopefully, Lord willing, is to actually hold a creation research retreat where you can actually come along. You can come and stay with us for a few days. It'll either be on the Isle of Wight or somewhere like Dorset, Great Fossils in Dorset. You can actually, we'll be doing, you know, devotions. We'll be doing some great presentations. If John can't be in here in person and Diane can't be here in person, I'm sure we'll get them to wire in electronically so you can see them up on the screen and you can chat with them and talk to them, and it'll be really great. But most importantly, we're going to take you out to go and dig up fossils. You see, back when I was first getting involved with creation research, two things really impressed me. The first one was everything was so hands-on. you got taken out to a field trip, you got to go and dig up your real fossils, you had fossils brought to your church and you could come up and touch them and feel them and get hands on with them. And I was so impressed by this. So it's a great thing to actually do, and you can come and dig up your own fossils. What was the second thing that really impressed me? Well, the first ever time I saw John in person, it was at a big conference, right? We sat down, John stood up on the stage, and he presented something, evidence for creation, that had been published in the very prestigious journal Nature that morning. And I thought, wow, not only does this guy really know his stuff, but it's so up to date. So one of the things that we try and do with creation research is whenever there are new discoveries, whenever there's new research, whether we've done the research or whether it's published in the news or the media or in journals and stuff like that, we try and give you a biblical perspective and give you a really up-to-date perspective. Now, one way of keeping up with this is signing up to our newsletter, as John said earlier, both our main one on the main site and our UK one. Make sure you sign up to both. And it's great for that because we go through, I mean, Diane, you're in charge of going through some of the stuff and writing comments on it and getting all up-to-date information. It's really good, yeah?
Yes. We just trawl the normal scientific news, give people a little summary of what was discovered and explain how whatever the scientists are saying about this as evidence for evolution, no, in fact, it actually fits the Bible when you work out what was actually found and what was the story they're telling about it. So it helps people to see the real evidence, what was actually found, and give them a biblical perspective.
It's really, really useful. It's very up to date. It'll help you with your walk with Christ as well as your evangelism and talking to other people. So make sure you go and sign up for that. I'm sure Sam can stick a link up somewhere in the description. But let's have a talk about some of this really up-to-date stuff that has been discovered really in the past year. Because just a couple of weeks before, I saw it was all over the news in the UK, a brand new dinosaur has been discovered in the Isle of Wight. In fact, it wasn't really brand new. It had been discovered back in the 70s, I believe, or the 80s. It had just been shoved in a drawer and really ignored until the scientists started digging out again and saying, hey, this doesn't quite fit up, so it's a new type of dinosaur. But even before that, it was less publicized, but another different type of dinosaur had also been found. So let's have a look at some of the stuff. So we went to a place called the Dino Isle Museum. It's a very famous museum. It's one of the only fully dinosaur dedicated museums in the UK. It's got some pretty cool stuff in there, including a fossil iguanodon from the Isle of Wight. I remember iguanodon is the first dinosaur to sort of be academically discovered and described. This is one that they found at a place called Brystone not too long back. Now, if you have a look at the Isle of the Wight, it's a little bit sort of diamond shaped, and it's got high hilly places and it's got low flat places. In fact, not too long back, they were known as the Isles of Wight, because there are actually 3 of them, and you still have the marshy bits in the middle where it floods today. But this came from one of the higher areas. It was dug out of a farm not too long back. And what I really like about the way that Dino Isle have presented this is they've put it back together in the museum the way that it was found. Oh, this would have been lying down flat when they found it. They've stood it up against the wall. It's quite sizable. It's a big dinosaur, right? But you see, the days in past when people used to dig up dinosaurs and they'd come back to their museum and they'd put them in a nice pose, right? Well, that was great for seeing a dinosaur, and getting excited about a dinosaur, but it didn't really show you how they dug it up. I quite like what Dino Isle have done here. They've put it back together the way that they found it. It's now on display in Dino Isle. You can go and see this yourself. It takes up one of the whole walls. It's a pretty decent sized fossil. You see the head at the top there? You see the neck? You see the shape of the neck and how the neck kind of bends back around over the body. The tail's on the other side, sort of curved up. Interesting stuff. In fact, you can actually see the diagram from the field as to how they actually excavated it. It's in a dino dead pose for sure. Oh, lots of dinosaurs are found like this. In fact, the majority of complete or partially complete skeletons that we found are all found like this. You have to bear in mind that a lot of fossils are just tiny little fragmentary pieces, but you can see how the neck is bent up back over the body. You can see how the tail is bent up, the legs are all sprawled out. It's so common, it's actually been named the dead dino pose. Dino death pose recreated. This is a report in New Scientist a little while back. Look what they had to say about the dino dead pose. In fact, you can see behind one of the big Tyrannosauruses from Canada. Many dinosaurs found with their head and their neck bent backwards and their tail arched over their back. Immersion in water is the simplest explanation. In other words, these dinosaurs drowned. In fact, this is something that you can see all throughout the museum loads of times with all of their dinosaurs, because it all displays only dinosaurs that are found in the island, right? And it talks about how, hey, these have been drowned. In fact, these have not only been drowned, they've been buried very, very quickly, because this is a central nervous system trauma, which is basically causing the dinosaur to go as sort of a final hope of being able to get a glove of air. And it's got to be buried quicker than it takes for the muscles to relax and for the head to flop forward and for them no longer to be in this pose. And then rigor mortis sets in after 30 minutes and you end up no longer in this pose anymore for good. So if you want to actually get this dinosaur like this, you've got to bury it within 3 or 4 minutes. Wow, this is a quick burial. This is a quick process. Okay. Not only do you find great examples of drowned dinosaurs, you also find a brand new dinosaur discovery from a place called Shanklin. Now, I already mentioned Shanklin. It's where I am, right? I just walk down to the beach and I find brilliant oyster fossils. This dinosaur, by the way, is called Vectoria venata. It's a lovely, great, big, long name. It's got some great naming stuff in there. I mean, Vector comes from the old Roman name for this island, for the Isle of Wight, Vectis. Right, there's even an entire formation called the Vectis Formation. That's in Yavalin, just a little bit up that way, right? Okay, brand new dinosaur discovery discovered this year, Vectoria venata, found at Shanklin, and the one thing they said is it is very unusual to find it at Shanklin. I mean, I know when I go to Shanklin, I don't tend to be looking for dinosaur bones, right? I find lots of shells. I find lots of giant cockle shells and clam shells and great big oyster shells, right? Not many dinosaurs around. Why was it unusual at Shanklin? Well, have a look at what they found in Excerpt. I mean, I've got my own sample just here, right? Giant oyster shells. This dinosaur, these bones were found mixed with fossil oyster shells, with bivalves, with all kinds of sea creatures. I mean, dinosaurs, by their very definition, live on the land. Sea creatures live in the sea. And these are deep sea creatures, by the way. What do they have to say about it? Well, there's the little technical piece of information, an extract of the published journal, Vectoria venata, and a little bit about it. Zoom into the important bit, right? That's kind of where we're looking, just down there. Last significant dinosaur find, it's likely that our new dinosaur was living on land just a few miles away to the north, was caught in a flood and washed through the river systems out to sea, where it eventually sunk to the floor to become a fossil. Hey, this dinosaur was caught in a flood. There's simply no other explanation for it, right? Even they, from a secular perspective, are admitting it. This dinosaur was living on land, he was caught up in a flood, and he was washed out to the sea, where he could be mixed with the fossils and buried. In fact, there's this rather stunning illustration. No, this isn't something that I've done to show you dinosaurs drowning in Noah's flood. This is actually direct from the Dino Isle Museum. The evidence is abundantly clear. These dinosaurs drowned. This dinosaur from Shanklin drowned. And here's a picture of him drowning, right? You can actually see the evidence straight in front of you. You just need to know where to look. Oh, and by the way, these dinosaur beds go all around the world. They're not just found down here on the Isle of Wight. They're found over in Hastings. It's the same Weldon flood formation. It goes down into the continent as well of Europe, and it's a big deposit. And then this is Cretaceous, right? And the Cretaceous stuff goes all over the world. You can dig this up everywhere. This is a big deposit, and it's a big flood that actually caused it. Noah's flood. Now I'm going to show you one other thing, because we brought it up on our presentation with Standing for Truth the other day, talking about, flood versus post-flood and where's the boundary and all this kind of stuff, because the Isle of Wight is brilliant for fossils, right? Not just dinosaurs, not just shells, but also things like these creatures. Oh, actually, no, let me tell you a bit about where this is. This is from Baldnor on the Isle of Wight. Now, I didn't quite get to take John here the last time he was over. We went to a place called Yarmouth, but this is just on the other side of the River Yar, right? The other side of the mouth of the Yar, to a place called Baldnor. And you have some rather interesting beds there. It's quite a small deposit, but we'll come on to that in a moment. But have a look at what we found. I go walking along down here because lots of mammal and reptile bones come out of this cliff. Things like turtle scutes, things like little bits of bone from crocodiles. Interesting. When I was walking along, and I found two big chunks of bone, and I realized, hang on a minute, these actually fit together, and they're quite big chunks of bone. Let's go have a look and see what I can find and see if there's any more of this bone down here. I started scraping away, and sure enough, you can start to see some of the bone being exposed just under my finger there. In fact, it actually ended up being an entire fossil jawbone. Absolutely beautiful. You see that gorgeous jet black color? I mean, it was almost complete. It was absolutely wonderful. There's the finished article, right? This is from a Paleotherum. It's sort of a creature a bit like a tapir, crossed with a pig, crossed with a small hippo, right? It's probably more closely related to a tapir. They're probably the living relatives today, but these things seem to be extinct as far as we can tell. They're quite distinctive in their jaw and their teeth and stuff, right? But wonderful creatures living alongside crocodiles, living alongside turtles. So one thing we know for sure is that the climate was warmer on the Isle of Wight back when these creatures lived, certainly much more warmer than it is today. Because, John, you live in Australia and you get big crocodiles, yes?
We certainly do. We have fossil ones around where I live, but the living ones only live 300 kilometers north. And it's too cold for them where I live now, because many people don't know that crocodiles' digestion is thermally dependent. They're cold-blooded creatures, and so in wintertime where we live, their enzymes simply stop working. If you feed a crocodile in winter here, you'll kill it. It may like to eat it, but in reality, it can't digest it, so it will rot before it's time to eat it. Well, further north where it's warmer, they will certainly eat all year round. And so you can see the climate affects where crocodiles can live. So they used to be widespread in Australia, and the climate changed before people had anything to do with it at all.
And see, this is, I've been to John's place, right, in the middle of winter, and it was warm enough for me to just walk around in my t-shirt, right? So where John is certainly a lot warmer than here in the UK, and yet it's too cold even where John lives for crocodiles. So we're talking a pretty decent climate way back in the past when these crocodiles and creatures were alive, right? Interesting implications for climate change, because just like down in Australia, same here on the Isle of Wight, it used to be warm, then it got colder, and now it's warming back up again. If you want to find out more about climate change and stuff like that, go and watch our trailer for our new documentary. Go and get Fire and Ice and watch that. Go and watch our Creation Conversations program, right? You'll find that very fascinating. A great fossil, and you can see it's buried next to seashells. You see the little sea snail shell there? Full of seashells, this deposit here. In fact, you find seashells all throughout the Baldnor deposits and the Hempstead deposits. Great big thick rows of shells all washed into position. Bedding after bedding after bedding. Beautiful. This is a catastrophic flood dump for sure. No doubt about it. But of course we ask the question then, which flood? Which catastrophe? Is it Noah's flood? Well, you remember I mentioned earlier the dinosaur beds go all around the world. I mean, they're in Australia there with John. They're in the USA. We've dug them up, right? This is a worldwide deposit. But what about the Hempstead beds? How big is that deposit? Well, there's the geological map of the Isle of Wight, right? And you can see down the on the sort of the south west coast, the Weldon Vectis formation. That's where the dinosaurs come out of, right? It's just exposed down here and up here, but it's found all up in the mainland of the UK and over on the continent as well. And you can see this stuff here, the Bembridge limestone and marls, and then down here, this tiny little Hempstead marls. Now, that's a pretty small deposit, really. That's where these fossils come out of. It's not very big. It doesn't turn up over in this part of Hampshire, doesn't turn up anywhere else on the Isle of Wight. In fact, the Bembridge marls themselves, the bigger Ice Age deposits, are only about 25 square miles. But the Hempstead marl, which is where these fossils are coming out of, is only 3 square miles. Now, when you compare this to known big flood deposits like the big flood logjam that you get over at Jurassic Ark, right, which covers about 5 times the size of the United Kingdom, that's a big flood, right? That would require a flood of global proportions to actually form it. 3 square miles? No, it definitely needs a catastrophe. It definitely needs a flood. It definitely needs something to wash all these creatures together, but it's not a global flood. In fact, you can actually see this is your topographic map, which is on display in the dino aisle, and you can see how it's all hilly up here. In fact, you can actually see down here how you'd have the different islands, 1, 2, 3 different islands over here by freshwater as well. And you can see at the time when the Romans came here how the different islands were there. But you notice where Hempstead is? It's right down in the lowest part. We're down here in a little gully, in a little valley. We're down here in a depression where the ice ended up pushing all of this muck and burying all these creatures. It was a rapid flood dump for sure, but it wasn't the global flood. But it makes one important point. If you want to make a fossil, you need the right process. It's got nothing to do with time. You need the right process, and that process has to be fast, because if you do not have it as being fast, then you're going to destroy your creature long before you have a chance to actually fossilize it. Not Noah's flood, it's a glacial deposit, but it was definitely rapid. Otherwise, you'd not have any of these fossils in here in the slightest.